To this virtual meeting of the Planning Committee on the 1st of July 2020 at 7:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Drew Heffernan and I'm the Chair of the Planning Committee. The Vice Chair of the committee is Councillor Burke, who today has sent his apologies for the meeting. So I'm proposing that we nominate Councillor Richard Clifton to become Vice Chair of this individual meeting so that he can take over the chairing of the meeting should I lose connection at any point. Could I please have a seconder for that appointment, please?
I'll second that, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are members in agreement? I'll give you a second to clarify. Not.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Cool. Thank you very much. So that is confirmed. Thank you, members, for joining this virtual meeting tonight. If you run into any IT issues, please contact Kathy Hayward from Community Services, whose contact details can be found in the meeting invitation tonight. And I'd also like to say, take the opportunity to say welcome and thank you for joining us for those that are watching on YouTube. Before we begin, I do want to let everyone know that one item from the agenda tonight has been withdrawn, and that is the item 7, allotment garden land rear of Green Hill and Wood End, Sutton. This has been withdrawn from the agenda because further information has been received regarding this application, which needs to be reviewed before the application can be heard by the committee. So I'd like to apologise for those of you that have tuned in for that application. I will remind you again when we get to that point of the agenda, but we will make it clear when that's coming back so that you can join us then. I also want to advise you that I'll reorder the remaining items so that 42 Blenheim Road will be heard ahead of item 6, which is Westmead Road. And I'll remind you again of this when we get to the relevant agenda item. And just so the meeting runs smoothly, I just want to go through a few key points, and this is to the people who are in the meeting. First of all, can you please only speak when I call on you to do so? And please don't speak over other members or interrupt others who are speaking. That's because the system we use will cut out and it'll be very difficult for people to follow who are watching. And then could you please also use the chat box to indicate if you wish to raise a question, join the debate or raise a point of order. And if you raise a point of order, I'll come to you as soon as the person speaking is finished. As the Planning Committee requires recorded votes, we shall go through a roll call vote for each of the decisions required here tonight, apart from the minutes. And what I'll do is I'll schedule 1 or 2 short breaks during the evening so we can save being stuck in front of the screen all evening. And also so that we can have a break. What we'll do is try and time these with adjournments when the committee services team are bringing people, speakers who are speaking on items, bringing them into the meeting, and then we'll minimise the time that we waste. So as we begin the meeting, I'm going to ask the clerk to do a roll call of who's in attendance, and I would ask that at the same time, members please also declare any interests. Sharon, could you please call the roll?
Thank you, Chair. Members, as I read your name, please turn on your microphone and camera and state if you are present and also if you have any declarations of interests on an item on the agenda. After you have spoken, please switch your microphone and camera off. As we heard earlier, apologies have been received from Councillor Kevin Burke, with Councillor Clifton attended as substitute and also Vice Chair. If I do not hear from a member, I shall return to them at the end of the roll call. Councillor Eric Allen.
Councillor Eric Allen present and no declaration of interest.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Clare.
Present with no interest to declare.
Councillor Richard Clifton.
Yes, I'm here. No interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Tim Foster.
I think you're on mute, Councillor Foster.
I'm here. No interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Vincent Gallagher.
Yes, it has. Yes, present. I did have an interest if we were doing number 7, but if we're not, I don't have to declare an interest at all, I presume.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Peter Gehringer.
Present, no interest to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Amy Haldane.
Present, nothing to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Shields.
Good evening. Present, no interest to declare. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jill Whitehead.
Yes, I'm present, but I have an interest to declare. As ward councillor for Carshalton Central, I have a particular view on the planning application in regard to Westmead Road, and I will therefore absent myself from that item and return to the meeting after the item.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Drew Heffernan.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm here and nothing to declare.
Thank you, councillors. I'll now pass back to the chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon. So agenda item 2 is apologies, but that's been covered in the roll call. So we'll move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the last meeting. Members, can we approve the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 9th of June 2020? I'll allow time for members to speak if they wish to express dissent, or if you can just let me know in the chat box that you approve of them, then we can move on to the rest of the agenda. Cool. So I can't see any dissent there, so I'll take those minutes as approved, and we can move on to the next agenda item, which is declarations of interest. Again, this was covered in the roll call of members, so we don't have to do anything separate for that. And with that, we're going to move through to agenda item 5, which is our first application of the evening, which is the Vine at 183 Banstead Road. I'm going to pass over to the officer, who is Edward Buckton, to present on this item.
Good evening, Chair. Can everybody see the presentation?
Yep, we can see it.
Thank you. Agenda item 5 relates to TPO 2020-02 at the Vine, 183 Banstead Road. It is for the consideration of committee whether to confirm the TPO to enable the continued protection of 2 pine trees. This matter came to the council's attention when the tree works application to fell both trees was made. Although this application was made in error and no TPO was in place at the time, this led to an assessment of the tree's value. Under the Town and Country Planning Act, a duty is placed on the local planning authority to protect valuable trees that are under threat. An assessment was carried out and found both trees to be making a high contribution to public visual amenity. The continued protection of the trees is considered to be warranted, as both are in good health and free from structural defects. The trees make a high individual amenity contribution in their own right, but also contribute to the wider setting, where mature pine trees add significant value to the landscape of the surrounding area. Other examples can be seen in both 185 and 187 Banstead Road, within the front garden of 1 Banstead Road South and the junction of Beeches Walk. The owner of the trees did not make an objection to the TPO. Objection was received from the neighbour at 185 Banstead Road. The reason for the objection relates to sap falling from the pine trees onto vehicles, which the owner states is damaging to the cars. While officers appreciate that trees can place a burden on the owner and those nearby, the TPO legislation gives a very clear instruction to the local planning authority. When considering the protection of trees, their value in most cases override the typical inconveniences of living near them. It is only in cases where actual and significant damage is occurring, the main example being subsidence, where it would not be appropriate to protect trees. My own observations of the 4 vehicles in the front garden of 185 Banstead Road is that although there is an obvious build-up of sap and dirt, no actual damage was evident. There's a few images there of the vehicles, 4 in total. It is therefore opinion of the council that it would not carry significant weight to justify the removal of the trees. It is therefore the recommendation of the council that the TPO is confirmed to ensure their continued protection. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do any councillors have questions to officers? If you do, can you write question in the chat function so I can come to you? Okay, I don't think anyone has notion to me that they want to ask a question on this. We would normally now move to any written statements and speakers. We don't have those, but I do now have a question from Councillor Gehringer, who's asking how old the trees are.
Well, I can't give an exact figure. They're in the region of sort of 50 to 60 years old. They're probably the similar age to the other pine trees in the area, but because of their growing close proximity, they're slightly smaller in their stem diameter.
Did you want to come back on anything there, Councillor Gehringer?
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, when the people who bought the house, were the trees still fairly high then?
I would think so. Yes. Yes.
So they bought the house with the trees as they are now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gehringer. If we don't have any other questions, we can move straight through to the debate on this item. If anyone wishes to contribute, otherwise we can move to the vote. Does anyone wish to debate this? Okay, Councillor Shields.
Thank you. I think for the fullness of information of everybody, really, if we could just have a few words from the tree officer or Mr. Webber about how a value of a street, well, it's not a street tree, but how a value of a tree within the street scene setting is assessed, and how we've come to this decision. Clearly, they are good, mature trees in good health. But I wonder if there's a little bit more we could, add to the quality of debate as to how we're here.
Okay.
If I could come in there.
Yes.
Excuse me. The tree preservation order legislation is primarily based on public amenity, so the trees need to be visible, they're from the public domain, and then it is a consideration weighing up all the factors of how prominent they are, whether they're good examples of the species, whether they contribute. That forms a rounded opinion on whether they're worthy of protection. It's also then considering other factors, whether they're likely to survive in the long term or not.
Councillor Shields, did you want to come back on that, or does that satisfy your curiosity?
The quality of the setting and then the public amenity is just something I'd like to have seen on the tape. So thank you.
Okay, sure. No, thank you. Councillor Clifton also wants to come in, and then I think we'll move to the vote on this one.
Well, I was just going to say that, I think that it's the trees that I think add greatly to the pleasant green suburban environment in our borough, which we also value. So they shouldn't be removed except for good reason. The reason for removing these trees is that they drop sap on the car of somebody who's parks their car under them. And that's a valid reason for getting rid of the trees. I think there wouldn't be many trees left in the borough, so I'd be in favour of retaining them and supporting the order. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Gehringer, you can speak if you're relatively quick, and we can move on, because I think lots of people are keen to vote on this and then move on to bigger items. But please, if you want to join in.
Right, yeah, what I wanted to say was this. Not that long ago, we had a pair of similar trees in Queens Road, Belmont. They wanted to have the trees chopped down, and our committee said no. I see no difference between those trees and these. So that's all I have to say.
Great, thank you, Councillor Gehringer. I'm going to move through to the vote now, and just for clarity, the vote will be on the recommendation that the tree preservation order be formally confirmed without modifications. So Sharon, can I turn to you for the roll call?
Thank you. Members, as I read your name, please could you turn your microphone and camera on and state if you are voting for, against or abstain on the recommendation. After you have spoken, please could you switch your microphone and camera off If I do not hear from a member, I shall return to them at the end of the roll call. And if a member is not present when I've asked for their vote several times, their vote will not be recorded. So Councillor Eric Allen.
For.
Councillor Richard Clare.
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Clifton.
For.
Councillor Tim Foster.
I'm for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Vincent Gallagher.
For.
Councillor Peter Castor. Councillor Gehringer.
Yeah, definitely for.
Thank you. Councillor Amy Haldane.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Tony Shields.
For the recommendation.
Thank you. And Councillor Jill Whitehead.
For the recommendation.
Thank you, councillors. The vote is 10 votes for the recommendation, no votes against and no abstentions. So I will now hand back to the chair.
Thank you, and I'm for it as well. Okay, so that has been agreed and passed. So what we'll do is we'll dispose of that item. Thank you everyone for your work on that. So the next item, as I've said earlier on in the meeting, I'm going to move 42 Blenheim Road to be the next item here tonight. And to present that, we've got Jody Williams. So I'm going to pass over to him now to present that item.
Thank you, Chair. I'm assuming everyone can see my screen. I haven't heard otherwise. Chair, for agenda item 9, I'd like to draw members' attention to the history of the processing of this application, as outlined in the opening paragraphs to the report, and confirmation of the order being received in the addendum. The site is the land to the side of 42 Blenheim Road, situated to the eastern side of the road, with the railway line running to the rear, and Sutton Common Station located directly to the north, located on Sutton Common Road. This is a view of the site with 42 Blenheim Road to the right. A view of number 42 with the site hauled in to the left. A view looking north with the site to the right. And the reverse view looking south with the site to the left. The site is subject to an extensive planning history, and similar applications has previously been refused by a planning committee and then subsequently dismissed at appeal. And I'll quickly recap the history for members. The original application dates from 2015 and was refused in terms of its design and internal space standards. In 2016, an application was refused and dismissed at appeal due to the design and impact on the adjoining property. Also in 2016, an application was refused and dismissed at appeal again due to the design. The parking provision was considered acceptable in this scheme. In 2018, a scheme for a 3-bed dwelling was allowed by the Planning Inspectorate. In May 2019, a scheme for 2 flats, identical in design and footprint to the current application before members tonight, was refused and dismissed at appeal due to the internal space standards and frontage fencing. And members may recall that in 2019, a 3-bedroom dwelling was refused by committee as it was considered to be an overdevelopment of the site. There, the current application is for 2 self-contained flats within a detached 2-storey building with accommodation at roof level. As discussed, this application was previously considered and refused by committee in May 2019 and then dismissed at appeal by the Planning Inspectorate in October 2019. The reasons for the Inspectorate dismissing the appeal relate to the height of the frontage fencing and the ground floor unit failing to meet the required internal space standards. This current proposal has addressed the previous concerns raised by the Inspectorate by removing the 1 metre high frontage fencing and replacing it with low-level picket fencing in this location. In addition, the ground floor unit has been altered from a 2-bedroom unit to a 1-bedroom unit. The details of the boundary treatment are subject to a condition within the suggested conditions. The proposal is considered acceptable in terms of its design, which reflects the characteristics of the existing properties, and given the siting, it's considered it would not adversely impact on any of the adjoining occupiers. All other aspects in relation to the parking, trees, biodiversity remain as previously submitted and considered acceptable. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the suggested conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for officers on this item? Again, if you can let me know in the chat, and I can then come to you, and I'll come to you in the order in which you. Councillor Whitehead.
Yes, as I understand it, the agreed planning application is for a single house, but this one is for flats. And this is different from a previous one for flats. I understand that the previous one that got rejected was for 2 beds from the ground and upper floor, and this one, can you correct me, is for 1 flat on 1 floor and 2 on the other floor. Can I ask why there is an application, if you know, for flats when there's already an approval for a single house?
The application is before us, and obviously we have to consider what has been submitted. The previous application comprised 2 2-bedroom flats, with the ground floor unit being considered to be providing an unacceptable internal space standards. So this application has addressed the concern raised previously and reduced the size of a 2-bed unit to a 1-bed unit to overcome that concern.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead, did you have any other questions on that particular point?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? I haven't seen any come up just at the moment. But there'll be opportunities to ask some questions soon, because we're moving on now to the written statements which have been submitted with this application. So you'll find them in your pack that was sent out a few days ago. Are there any people who have any questions on those? And if you do, can you mention which one you're talking about when you ask your question? No. Okay, then that's fine. So we can now move on to speakers. We don't have any objectors, supporters, or the applicant, but we do have Councillor Pennock, who is the ward councillor for this application. Welcome to the Planning Committee, Councillor Pennock. You'll have 4 minutes to address the committee, and then if it's okay, we'll also have some questions for you after that, possibly. Can we still check? Is your sound working, Councillor Pennock?
Yes, I think so. I'm just trying to time myself, make sure I don't go over. Well, thank you very much. And firstly, thank you for taking the item earlier on the agenda. Last time we considered Blenheim Road, it was at the end of the agenda and there was no time and it had to be taken over to the next meeting. So I'm grateful for that. And I also want to start by thanking the applicant for agreeing to the judicial review we had to go through in order to allow this application to come to committee for decision. I'm asking the committee to refuse planning permission on the grounds of overdevelopment, reduced level of amenity space and adverse effect on the area, contrary to policies 28 and 29 of the local plan. Now, as many of you will know, Blenheim Road was built in the early 1930s as part of the Westmead farm estate around the newly opened Wimbledon-Sutton railway line opposite Sutton Common Station. I'm sure many of you know this area. They are 2- and 3-bedroom country cottage-style semi-detached houses which have a distinctive character with arts and crafts features. The road is a cul-de-sac. It's very narrow with an alleyway at the bottom, providing a pedestrian link to Staten Road. The residents have recently prepared a character appraisal with a view to the road becoming an area of special local character. This particular site has a long history of planning applications. This is the 14th planning application. We had 8 for the existing house, which is 42 Blenheim Road, and we've had 6 for the garden land. So I think Councillor Whitehead's question was actually very relevant. Planning consent was granted for the conversion of number 42 into 2 flats into 2018, and this was completed last year. The current application is for a building with 2 flats in the garden land on the side of this. And I'd like to compare the application with the recent one for a 4-bedroom house, which was refused in January this year by the committee on grounds of overdevelopment, reduced level of amenity space, and adverse effect on the area. The proposed building in the current plan will take up exactly the same footprint as for the rejected scheme. The garden space is identical. It is similar in all respects, except that instead of being occupied by 1 household as for a house, it will now be occupied by 2. Given that you refused permission for the 4-bedroom house, I ask you to be consistent and also refuse permission for this development. However, if you decide to grant planning permission, can I ask for 2 extra planning conditions to be put in place? When number 42 was converted into flats, there were considerable issues during the building works. The road was blocked off and cones were used to stop residents parking. At times, the whole road was blocked. And I've said this is a very narrow road. As well as being narrow, with limited parking, the road also provides pedestrian access to the station. Can I ask that we add a condition to require the building work to be constrained within the site of the development and to keep the road and footway clear at all times? Secondly, the work at number 42 was not completed according to the plans. The development has a dropped curb which covers the width of the property, while only a single dropped curb was agreed in the plans. When I challenged this afterwards, I was told that the change was permitted development. The impact of the wider drop curb has been to remove a further parking space in the road, which are very much at a premium. So can we please remove permitted development rights from this application to prevent the same problem from occurring again? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pennick. And within your 4 minutes, that's very good. Thank you very much. Before we move on to questions from members, I'm just going to ask if either Jodie or Andy have anything to respond to from what Councillor Pennick's raised, in particular his suggestions about extra conditions.
Chair, if I can come in, thank you. If members are minded to grant this application tonight, it's granting permission for 2 flats, and flats don't have any permitted development rights anyway, so any condition would be ultra vires, so that wouldn't be necessary. I do appreciate that. I think when this comes to committee in the past, at the time of it coming, there have been a number of domestic projects going on in the road, and I do empathise with residents, particularly during the current coronavirus, with more people being at home and more cars being parked up. So it's something we do need to have a think about. There is a condition requiring a construction logistics plan, where I think we can probably deal with all of these matters properly in that way. So I don't believe we need an additional condition on that. And I might just pass you over now. I don't know if Nick Greenwood can come in and speak on the matter of the crossover. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Hello, yes. Can you hear me? Yes, I'm Nick Greenwood, Highways Engineer. Just on the footway crossover, the existing footway crossover to the existing property was provided at the end of 2018. There are specific requirements that these need to meet. For example, you are normally not required any more than 4 metres wide width at the back of the footway. That's for safety reasons and obviously for management of on-street parking and other matters. So all applications for footway crossovers are considered in that way, as the previous one will have been with regard to on-street parking and other highway matters.
Thank you. With that, do any councillors have any questions for Councillor Pennick? Again, if you could let me know on the chat, I can then bring you in. Okay, Councillor Whitehead.
Yes, I was interested in the information about area special local character. I gather there's going to be an item at the next HEB committee asking for this area to be made an area special local character. With this development, what impact would this have on an ASLC, and would it in fact provide a precedent for future development?
Okay, thank you. Does an officer want to respond to Councillor Whitehead's question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And in answer to Councillor Whitehead, yes, there is work being done to bring forward a report on designating this road as part of an area of special local character. I think it is, as Councillor Pennick noted, it intrinsically is noted for kind of the richness of the architectural features in the street scene. And I think that's the kind of the homogenous factor that brings it all together and gives it that identity. From an officer perspective, I don't think we feel that the design of this development that's coming forward this evening is necessarily at odds with that architectural character and the essence of what I think makes that street special. So I don't think it would be in any way detrimental. That's certainly the officer view on it, given that the detailing of the building very much is in sympathy with the buildings that it adjoins. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have any other questions, Councillor Pennick? Councillor Haldane?
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from Councillor Whitehead's question, I know we're not in the business of this, but if we could just hypothesise that the area of special local character, sorry if I said that wrong, was already in place, and then this application came to the committee, would that prevent or would that have changed the officer's recommendation to grant permission for this particular application?
In my view, no, Councillor Haldane. Sorry, Chair. To jump straight in, as I said to Councillor Whitehead, I think it's because of the unifying factors of the architectural style of the street, which I think brings this character together. And even if it were designated presently as an ASLC, in terms of how its external appearance within the area, I don't think there would be any issue with that. I think officers will probably still come forward with a recommendation to grant. That's my view on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. At the moment, I can't see any other questions, so I think we can move into the debate on this item. Is there anyone who wants?
Sorry, Chair. I mean, there were supposed to be questions to me. Can I make some responding comments?
Yeah, sure.
Just very briefly, I'm not so concerned about the design of the building, and I have to accept that through a number of planning applications that have come forward, planning officers have managed to negotiate improvements in design, which actually match fairly well the other properties in the road. My objections are about overdevelopment and reduced level of amenity space, which councillors have not yet addressed, which is about how much of the available garden this building actually takes up. And it's exactly the same as the 4-bedroom house that you refused back in January. And that was the key point I was making in my submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pennick. And I think hopefully some of the councillors here will cover that possibly as part of the debate. We'll move into that part of the agenda. But I think as we don't have any other questions going through, can I just say thank you very much for joining us this evening and for passing those comments on. We'll now move through to the debate.
Hello, I have a question actually.
Sorry, you did.
I wanted to follow up the comment that Councillor Pennick made. I would have asked if someone else hadn't asked, and that's the question of constrained garden sites, because I've mentioned this before, that I have a similar site in my ward where there were a total of 4 planning applications on it before a suitable compromise was attained. There does seem to be an issue with developers wanting to build on constrained sites, which does reduce amenity and does result in overcrowding and overdevelopment. And I wonder whether this is addressed in the local plan in any way, because if we have a problem here, we could be getting problems in the future.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Whitehead. I think that's probably a question for Andy rather than Councillor Pennick.
Yeah, I mean, Councillor Whitehead, I mean, you sat on the cross-party members task and finish group for the local plan. I think we did cover kind of the spatial strategy for the borough, which is trying to concentrate development in our town and district centres to protect our more suburban areas. So that's the context. But nevertheless, if somebody does come forward on the site and it does meet all the other policies in the plan, which we consider this application does, then and you can see, because Jodie's run through the chronological order of the applications over that process of time, and I know this is difficult, particularly for residents who have to comment on applications time after time, and I know that can be frustrating. But it's got us to the point now where there's little, well, no areas of disagreement really, especially because we've had an appeal process which has kind of been intervening in that chronology as well. The point about overdevelopment that Councillor Pennick made is completely understood. Outwardly, this building would match, if you like, the character of the street, but by fairly clever design, in our view, it's a house outwardly, but it is kind of going to be used as two flats. In terms of all of the dimensional criteria that we have to subscribe to, the development meets those as well. So, there aren't really grounds for us to refuse. I think we would have a very difficult time trying to justify grounds for refusal at appeal, given the chronology, given the fact that many of these issues have been to the planning inspectorate already, and we found ourselves in this current position where officers are recommending to this scheme, which we think is in character. I understand the points that it's two flats in a property, which was previously agreed as a house, but nevertheless, it does kind of, if you like, tick all the boxes in terms of our dimensional criteria. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. As we are now moving to debate, can I ask Councillor Pennick, are you okay to log off from the meeting and move to the next bit? And you can follow us on the YouTube stream.
Yes, I'll move back to YouTube. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Okay, so we're now moving into debate. Is there anyone who wants to start us off and perhaps cover some of the issues that have been raised? Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you, Chair. The history of the whole development is very fraught, and I understand and I have sympathy with the residents. We covered parking before, and that was a thing that obviously will raise its ugly head again, but we don't really have much control over that at the moment. The fact that that it has been passed in various forms, and they have now changed a few things to get around complaints that the Bristol had. I rather feel that it has run its time, and I think I will be voting for it.
Thank you, Councillor. We've got a few people now wishing to come in. I've got Councillor Whitehead, Councillor Foster and Councillor Gehringer. Can I take Councillor Foster first, as we haven't heard much from Councillor Foster this evening?
Thank you for that, Chair. My concern is very simple. I've only been on this committee a couple of years, and this has been pretty repetitious, Blenheim Road. And I don't agree with Councillor Gallagher. I would be voting against this because I believe that if we vote for it, it will be back in a couple of months' time looking for two-bedroom flats. There has been this constant drive to increase, and I do remember that first one where they were talking about the parking issues, which has obviously been exacerbated by the double width drop curb outside number 42. And I would like to see us stick to a three-bedroom house, stick to what's been agreed, and if we're not careful, they'll just be back with another clever solution to add another room. So I'm for sticking with our three-bedroom approved progress.
Right. Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to bring in Councillor Clare next, and then Councillor Whitehead afterwards. Councillor Clare?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Can you all hear me okay? I just wanted to say I thought I think this is quite a balanced case. I thought Councillor Pennock spoke very persuasively there, and I can see the arguments about overdevelopment and over-intensification in an area that's not been designated for it. But on balance, I think I'm inclined to agree with the officer's point of view that it's broadly in keeping with the character of the local area by virtue of the nature of the application. But again, if anyone wants to address that point, I'd be interested to hear. So that's all from me.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Whitehead, do you want to come in next?
Yes, I was interested in what Councillor Pennock was saying about the conditions. We know that there's already an approved application. Can these conditions help prevent, for example, some of the moves to permitted development? Though I think that Andy said that you couldn't have permitted development with 2 flats. Although, in fact, the development that I was referring to in my ward, they did actually build on with permitted development to the side and to the rear of 2 separate developments that made up this particular house. So I do have a concern about permitted development, but can conditions help to alleviate some of the issues here?
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. What I'm going to do is bring Councillor Gehringer now, and then we can come back to your point, so that Andy can clarify his earlier point, and then hopefully that'll answer your question. If not, we can come back to you. But Councillor Gehringer.
Thank you very much. I agree with Councillor Pennock, actually. He's the ward councillor. He knows the area very well. My concern is about this perhaps preventing an area of special local character being made because of this building. I recall years ago we wanted to have a area of special local character in Station Road and Belmont, but because one of the houses was sort of fairly new, they refused to do that. So I am concerned. I like areas of special local character, and I wouldn't want to think that this building would prevent it becoming one. So that's my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to bring back Andy on that point, but what I will say is that I think earlier on we heard that actually this application itself probably wouldn't affect the application for an ASLC, but I'll let Andy come back on that if I've misunderstood.
Chair, no, you haven't misunderstood, and I did say earlier, if it were an ASLC, I think officers would still be making a recommendation to approve. It's a proposed ASLC, and I see nothing wrong with this development, or certainly anything that would undermine the case for an ASLC. And I just, for the interest of balance, I think all members, perhaps with the exception of Councillor Clifton, were on planning committee last time. And you recall the application for the security fence around a commercial property, which was a kind of, if you like, something of an anomaly within that particular ASLC. But nevertheless, when that ASLC boundary was drawn up, that property was part and parcel of it. So even if you have a property which is anomalous to the appearance, it doesn't affect the boundary that you draw around it, in the expectation that should there be a redevelopment or new development on that site, then the standards of on our expectations must meet the requirements for that ASLC. But I really don't think it's an issue in this case. And Chair, if you don't mind, if I can perhaps address Councillor Whitehead's point there. I can pick up with you separately, Councillor, outside this meeting about the matters in your ward. No, where permitted development rights are removed by condition, that's one matter, but flats don't have any permitted development rights. So anything in terms of any outward expansion of this property or any applications to intensify the development beyond this particular application would need to come back to planning. I hope that answers your questions, councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. We've had another person wish to speak, Councillor Shields. So, Councillor Shields, do you want to make your comments?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think this has been through 5 or 6 applications in the last 4 years. We've seen a lot of this site, and I must admit, when I saw the appeal decision and when I saw it get permission for a 3-bedroom house, which would probably be of a similar size and scale of the existing area that they're trying to get as an area of special local character, I must say I thought, well, that's probably the end of that. Then they got what they want, but they haven't, have they? And Councillor Foster put it quite accurately that there's always room for more and yet more applications. I tend to sort of side with, is the wrong way to put it, but agree with Councillor Foster that if it's been deigned and tested by the planning inspectorate for a 3-bedroom house as acceptable, then get on with it. So I will not be voting for this application.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clifton, you wanted to come in?
Well, just to say, Chair, obviously, yeah, I haven't been involved in the all the previous debates, and I gather from what people have said that this has been before the committee a number of times in the past. I think Councillor Foster and perhaps Councillor Shields have alluded to this. Councillor Foster said, well, agree to this and they'll be back again. But my understanding always with the planning committee is that you've got to look at what's in front of you, and if they come back with something else, then that can be looked at later on. A lot of the reasons for rejecting earlier applications related to design. Looking at this, the design didn't strike me as that bad, and Andy said that it wouldn't be. It wouldn't materially affect the application for an area of a special local character. I think it's well balanced. So on balance, I think I'd support this. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we're going to move to the vote in a second. I mean, what I would say, I think I completely share the frustration that Councillor Foster has and Councillor Shields has. We have a big backlog of applications. We have lots of people bringing things forward. It makes our life more difficult and extends the length of our meetings if we're having to make 4, 5, 6, 7 decisions about the same piece of land. The problem is that is something we have to do. We have to see each application separately, and if it means that someone sends 100 applications for one plot of land, then that is something we have to do. But I do share that frustration. I mean, I think on balance, I agree with Richard and Councillor Clifton's points that a lot of the reasons for refusal actually, I don't think are necessarily that strong. And some of them, I mean, I don't, for example, the ASLC point, I think it's been pretty clear that that isn't something that will affect that. And I think even Councillor Pennock came and didn't necessarily have complaints about the design of the application. But I will be quiet now and move on to the vote. Sharon, are you okay to do the roll call?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So members, if I could ask you please, when I read your name, to turn on your microphone and camera and state if you are voting for, against or abstaining on the recommendation. After you've spoken, please switch off your microphone and camera. If I don't hear from a member, I will come back to you at the end of the vote. And I will ask you several times so that we can try and record your vote if possible. So if I can move first to Councillor Eric Allen.
I'm voting against the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Clare.
I'll vote for, in favour of the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Clifton.
I'll vote for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Tim Foster.
I will vote against the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Vincent Gallagher.
For.
Councillor Peter Gehringer.
Against.
Councillor Amy Haldane.
For. I think I had a problem with my microphone, sorry.
Is that for? Thank you. Councillor Tony Shields.
Against.
Councillor Jill Whitehead.
For.
And Councillor Drew Heffernan.
4.
So I make that 6 votes for, 4 votes against, and no votes to abstain. So I'll now pass back to the chair.
Thank you. So that is 6 for and 4 against. So that has been approved. So thank you very much again for that, and thank you for Councillor Pennick for joining us to comment on that application, and also to all those people who wrote written statements in for that application as well. We're going to move on now to the application for Westmead Road. Before I do that, in the original papers, the third item to discuss was the allotment garden at the rear of Green Hill and Wood End, Sutton. I just want to remind people that are watching on YouTube looking for that item that that has been moved from the agenda tonight, so we won't be discussing that. So if anyone is still on the line who wants to see that, it won't be here tonight. So you can log off if you'd like to. So Councillor Whitehead, as we move to Westmead Road, do you want to leave the meeting, and then community services will let you know when to come back?
Yes, I'm just about to leave the meeting.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you. So we're now going to move on to the officer's presentation for this item. So can we move to that, please?
Thank you, Chair. The next item is an application at 7175 Westmead Road. Planning permission is sought for the demolition of the existing buildings and erection of a Part 3, Part 4 storey detached building to provide 35 self-contained units with car parking, refuse and cycle storage, and hard and soft landscaping to the rear, and a new vehicle access from Grove Road. The application site is located on the south side of Westmead Road, on the corner with Castor and Grove to the east, and this is Sutton Grove there with Harold Road, Byron Road and Cowper Avenue. The existing use of the site is as a timber yard. 74 Westmead Road, which is part of this semi-detached building, has always formed part of the timber yard since the 1970s. 75 Westmead Road here is a newsagent. The building on the northwest of the site is ancillary offices, which are used by the existing warehouse. Just to run through some photos of the site and surrounding area. This is Detached House to the south of the site. I'd just like to point out the existing side-facing windows on this property. This is just looking at the side of the existing warehousing from Castor and Grove. This is just looking at northeast along Westmead Road at the application site. This is opposite the application site. This is 76 to 78 Castor and Grove. This is the opposite the site as well. This is looking towards the rear of 70 Castor and Grove. Again, in the report, it should be noted that there is some impact on the side-facing windows of this property as well. This is just looking across the site, just to give you an idea of inside the site, looking towards the existing access on Castor and Grove. Again, this is just looking back, and this small patch of area is the rear garden to 75 Westmead Road, sorry. This is looking at the side elevation of 76A Westmead Road. This particular building, which is warehousing, has an extant prior approval to convert it to residential dwellings. Again, just looking at the rear elevations of 74 and 75 Westmead Road. Obviously, this particular property, 74 Westmead Road, is now dilapidated and in a poor state of repair. And again, just looking to the front of the site, just to note that this bus stop, TfL have agreed with us that the bus stop could be moved, and that's secured within Section 106 of the within the Section 106 agreement. Again, looking to the east of the site, this is 76A to 78. Again, the front of the site here has a extant planning permission for 8 residential units and commercial uses at ground floor. That's a 3-storey development. And again, just looking south towards the site from the other side of Westmead Road. And these are the buildings are opposite Westmead Road, which is I believe a Victorian terrace. Again, there is some impact on the first floor windows of this development in terms of sunlight, daylight, and again another photo. And this is just looking east along Westmead Road. Just to give you some context, these are the 4-storey developments within the area. These are towards the southern end of Carshalton Grove, which front onto Westmead Road, front onto Carshalton Road, sorry. And these are just sort of other examples of 4-storey development, which are inside and outside APIs and areas of taller building potential. The Planning Permission is for a Part 3, Part 4-storey building, which would provide 35 residential units. This would be split into 15 one-bed flats, 15 two-bed flats, and 5 three-bed flats. Through the application has been tested, the viability of the application has been tested by the council's independent consultants, and they're in agreement with the applicant that 41% affordable housing per unit, which is 35% per habitable room, would be acceptable, and this would be secured by Section 106 agreement as well. Within the rear of the property, through amendments, we have secured additional car parking now to provide 28 car parking spaces, of which 4 would be accessible, and included is a car club space, so that would provide a total of 29 car parking spaces. As well, there's 159 square metres of amenity space found in the courtyard here. Just to run through some of the floor plans, so it's just a floor plan showing that quite a majority of the units along the north are dual aspect, with single aspect units on this sort of southern projecting wing. And it's similar sort of floor layout. This is the fourth floor layout. There will be roof terraces along here, but there is a condition within the recommended conditions to secure privacy screens to prevent overlooking and loss of privacy towards the south of the application site. This is just a roof plan which would provide a brown roof and solar panels. The development would be carbon neutral, providing a 52.1% saving of carbon dioxide on site, and a financial contribution to the council's offsetting fund would be secured by Section 106. Just some elevations of the building. As you can see, the 4th floor would be set back. We have, through, again, amendment negotiation with the applicant, we've secured a high level of detailing to the building. You can see sort of red bricks dividing up, different colours of bricks to sort of articulate the elevations. And as you'll see in the CGIs, there are some recesses and some projections, but only small ones, which would add further articulation to the building. These are just sort of the rear elevations that look over the courtyard. And as you can see, they're all provided with balconies and private amenity space for each individual flat. These are just sort of close-up examples of the detailing that would be found. So again, just sort of highlighting the high level of materiality that's been secured. Again, it's just a plan showing the proposed landscape, and with pergolas over the car parking, and children's play space would be secured for 0 to 4-year-olds in this rear landscaped area, and just some sections as well showing the landscaping. And just to run through some of the CGIs in respect to this. So this is looking across towards the site. As you can see, the 4th floor now, because it's been brick and changed materiality, now isn't as apparent as previously when it was metal clad. The detailing of the balconies is improved. The recessing and detailing around the fenestration as well is of a high standard, so much so that even though the building is outside an area of taller building potential and outside this Sutton Town Centre API, officers are of the opinion that the design is exceptional enough to warrant the additional height. That, taken into account the fact that the building would be carbon neutral and the level of affordable housing, on balance, in respect to everything, officers recommend approval of this application, subject to the 106 agreement being signed by the applicant. And just to run you through a few more, this is CGI looking along Carshalton Grove, and a CGI looking east, along Westmead Road. and just the obligations that would be secured. So officers recommend this application for permission subject to the recommended conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Before we move on, I just want to say welcome to Mrs. James, who's joined us, just to let her know that we've got her logged on properly. And we won't bring you in just yet, but just so that you're aware that you're logged on correctly. So do we have any questions to officers on the presentation? Councillor Shields.
There we are. I think we're okay. If we could go back a couple of slides, I think almost the first one that shows the street scene, and I think I heard there's an extent building permission on what was the electrical wholesalers. I think we're showing it in sort of a shaded grey. That's the fella. Yes, that's it. So the shaded grey area, is that the area that is yet to have a building that is already approved?
That's correct. So that building's been approved, I believe in 2018, so the permission's extant. And that's just to give you an indication of the scale and massing of that particular building that was approved.
So is the building that was approved also right up to the curtilage, right up to the edge of the pavement?
I believe it is, Councillor Shields, yes.
Right, so an initial concern will be quite what would actually, if built, it's got to get built, quite a long terrace right up to pavement side. I was unaware that it was, in fact, two applications joined together, which would have a cumulative effect of a high building facade right up to the pavement.
So the application at 76A to 78 is obviously by a different applicant and a different developer, but there potentially could be, depending on whether committee what committee decides to do with regards to this application, and also whether or not that building actually gets built out. But there, like I say, there is an extent permission there, which I believe that councillors should be aware of in the determination of this application.
So, thinking in the fourth parallel, if this planning application gets agreement tonight, it's probably a fair gambler's guess to expect the already approved application at 3 stories to come back for an extra story on top. Is it not?
They could come back for an additional story in terms of that particular development site. Obviously, in terms of the application, we would have to assess it and look at the planning balance. So obviously, you'll be looking towards what affordable housing they could bring, whether it be carbon neutral, any other benefits. With this particular application, officers believe that the level of affordable housing and the design of the building are such, as well as all the other benefits, that on the planning balance, that this application would be acceptable. I'd also like to sort of point out to councillors that's information contained within the report, that this application had been to 2 design review panels and has been through a number of iterations with officers. The design review panel, because of the location on the corner site, felt that a 4th story could be accommodated, but obviously officers would need to push hard in terms of the design, and we believe that we have now got there.
But did the design, sorry, Chair, through you, did the design and review panel take the approved site as part of the actual resulting street scene?
The existing timber yard, Councillor Shields, or?
I'm talking about the electrical wholesalers. This is a cumulative effect of a change in street scene, quite profound. And did the design and review team take this application that we're speaking about on the corner in isolation, or did they context it into how the street scene would look with the already approved application for the electrical wholesalers site?
I think they would have been aware possibly of the history of the site next door. I'm not sure that they were ever presented with what was proposed at the neighbouring site. So not the detail of what was there, if you see what I mean.
So with sorry, Chair. So without seeing what is actually agreed on the CGI, the place next door could look like Dracula's castle, or it could look like a Tudor Beetham mansion, couldn't it? I mean, there is.
Sorry.
How do you get the context of the street?
Councillor Shields, can I come in here? Sorry to interrupt, but a point was made earlier that we're considering the application in front of us this evening. I do understand where your line of questioning is going here. The application granted in 2017 for a 3-storey building next door. We haven't got the elevations. We're giving you an idea of the scale and the rough positioning of the building on the back edge of pavement. I don't think we can necessarily jump to the conclusion that if members were minded to grant this evening, that the neighbouring site would come in for a new scheme with an additional storey. And even if they did, we'd have to consider that application on its individual merits, and there's no we mustn't presuppose that developer will come forward with a design of the standards which would find the support of officers and through the auspices of the independent design review panel. There is a gap between the two buildings. It won't be a continuous frontage. So I think we can offer some assurances in that the building is set aside from the neighbouring building, which you can see is edged in grey. So I'd invite members to observe this. This is obviously a computer-generated image. We don't generally tend to use these as a reason for granting or not granting an application. It's further information to help members understanding of the context. Councillor Shields' questions, I think, are useful to explore this a little bit more. But I think just a note of caution that I don't think we should be using speculation as to what might happen on the site at QVS as a reason to support or not support this application this evening, members.
Can I come back, Chair?
Briefly, Councillor, I've got a few other people who want to come in.
Thank you. I will be brief. Well, I great respect for Mr. Webber. There, that said, but when we look at this in isolation, I mean, the place that's already got the planning application, QVC, it's the texture. Is it a rendered finish? Is it glass? Is it pebble dash? Is it red brick, black brick? As far as we know, in contrast to the application site, it could really look like quite frankly, a punch in the mouth. So if we're going to take decisions, we must do it in the context of the street scene and what is previously approved. I know Mr. Webber disagrees with me, but that's why we have a planning committee.
Cool. Thank you, Councillor Shields. We'll move on to some other questions, and you're very welcome to come back to that as part of the debate. And members can clearly put a particular amount of weight on that observation compared to other factors when they make their decision. Councillor Gehringer, do you want to raise your points? Or ask your question, sorry, of officers.
Hello.
Hello.
Right. I think you said my name rather than Gallagher. I will get a bit confused.
No, it was you. It was you, Councillor.
Right. Okay. First of all, I've often driven down Westmead Road, and I've always noticed that pair of semis, the one that's dilapidated on one side, and I think the news agents on the other. Is that whole building coming down? Is half of it coming down? What's happening? I've always thought what a shame the semi on the left is in such a dilapidated condition. Why can't it be brought back into use? That was the first bit of the question. The second bit was the timber yard. I mean, you know, this is going to be a loss of business and employment. Is that okay? I thought sometimes we don't like losing employment and this sort of place, you know.
Yes. So in respect to the timber yard, because it's outside of a established industrial location, the policy requires that the developer market the site at a reasonable rate for a period of 12 months and provide us with evidence that this has been done. The applicant did advertise it and put it out for let at a reasonable rate. The rate was £8.50 per square foot, which officers have checked with their assets and they agree that that is a reasonable rate. I myself have had a look, and you get warehouses for 10 to 12 square feet in the surrounding area in industrial, established industrial areas. Other reasons why people weren't keen on taking up the site was the fact that it is located in a residential area. And obviously there is potential for conflicts in terms of noise and disturbance, depending on what activities the future occupiers may wish to undertake under the current use class of that site. In terms of the semi-detached properties, the number 74, which is the dilapidated one, having checked the planning history for the entire timber site, number 74 has always been part of the timber site as far back as the 1970s. So the Class BA industrial use that's on the site was established back in the 70s, and that dilapidated part of the semi-detached has always formed part of the site. So it would fall within a Class B8 use rather than being a C3 dwelling. And that's how officers have assessed that. In terms of the other half of the semi-detached property, that's Class A1 retail. And again, the policy says that if we are looking at a lot of it, Class A1 retail, there's got to be other provision of that similar type of convenience retail within sort of a immediate area. In respect to the Westmead Road local centre, there is the Londis opposite, which provides sort of that convenience retail that the news agents would as well. So in terms of the sort of uses, that's why officers have recommended sort of the loss of the industrial site, because it's been shown that it's a surplus to requirement and not an attractive site for future developers to use. In respect to your question about bringing the semi-detached property back into use, that would be something which I personally wouldn't know about, because I think you would need to get a structural engineer just to check the the integrity of the building and what have you. And I unfortunately don't have that information in front of me, Councillor Gehringer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gallagher, now, if you want to ask your question of officers.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. Was the developer ever, was it ever discussed with the developer not to bring it right to the edge of the back end of the pavement? It looks sort of out of keep with obviously all the other properties running down that line. I know there are houses across the road, yes, but they are of the type. This is a new development, and I think it kind of sticks out a bit like a sore thumb in a way. The other couple of points is there's pavement parking round the corner. I couldn't quite make out whether because they're having their access to parking, were we losing a parking space? I did notice when I was around there that it isn't very wide, and I'd like Highway's opinion as to with the pavement parking, was that going to be a bit difficult for access in and out with the number of cars, because it's not a great road. I noticed a thing about roller shutters, which could you sort of talk to me a bit more about that, because I would have thought gates opening was more normal. And if it was passed today, I know that there is this thing about that that developers can work on site up until 9 o'clock, suggested by the government. Piling, working up till 9 o'clock, is that something that this particular site could be subjected to? Thank you.
Chair, can I?
Yeah, sure.
So, Chair, can I just come in just on the final point, Councillor Gehringer, to provide you with perhaps some reassurance on that. Planning with our regulatory services team, I'll be doing some work about this government announcement about getting the economy back on track and allowing building sites to work up until 9 p.m. in the evening. We're going to be channeling all of those inquiries through our regulatory services colleagues, and clearly we have to take a very clear view of this as to whether or not those type of activities that a developer wants to carry out are going to be acceptable to that time of night. I think our approach is going to be that it's going to be non-intrusive works, mostly internal work, certainly no heavy engineering, powering, power tools and piling. I don't think that's going to be acceptable in the residential area. It's a difficult piece of kind of legislation, if you like, or relaxation of legislation that's been announced here, because I think it puts local authorities in a difficult position. But I think, particularly with the coronavirus and a lot more people working at home during the week now, I think people are entitled to the quiet enjoyment of their properties at the end of a working day. And I think, we'll be taking a reasonable view of this, but we certainly wouldn't be allowing anything which is going to be really intrusive and noisy until 9 o'clock at night. I don't think that's acceptable. I'll invite Ian to sort of comment on the other points that you raised.
Thank you, Andy. In respect to setting the building back, the site is a very constrained site, and obviously there's been a lot of give and take in respect to various elements. So, as I said earlier, the application came forward with a lesser level of car parking than it had now, to allow for the additional car parking in response to objections from both the highways officer, but also sort of allay some of the concerns of residents as well. Part of the amenity space had to be lost, but officers felt that was a reasonable sort of compromise on that. I think in terms of this, in sort of setting the building back, that would obviously have a knock-on effect on both the viability and to some extent the number of dwellings that you could fit on the site. And officers felt that because you've got sort of the terraces opposites, such as 108 to 113 Westmead Road, and further down the road, the sort of two-storey white sort of Art Deco building there, they're built up to the high street, and officers felt that this would just be following that same sort of principle that those buildings have set there. I do take the point that when you sort of come to the more dwelling house typology of the terraces and semi-detached properties, they are set back and they have front gardens, but obviously this is a slightly different development in the fact that it is a flatted development rather than being dwelling houses. But it was something that, obviously as officers, we would always try to seek as some sort of defensible space. And I would also like to point out that even though it is built hard up, there are terraces to the front of the flats. So I think when you go back, you can see that, okay, the columns are up to the pavement there, and a number are there, but there are actual insets as well, and we thought that this would sort of provide some sort of relief along the pavement. And I think I'll have to ask my colleague Nick Greenwood just to discuss the loss of the car parking space.
Yes, regarding the car parking spaces, Carshalton and Grove, the pavement parking, there's actually not any loss of parking spaces. A total of 3 spaces would need to be relocated to facilitate the moving of the access. The moving of the access does actually have the big advantage of the new access being located considerably further away from the junction, from the highway safety point of view, and all that work would be part of a section 278 agreement for the highway works around the site, which we would need to look at and approve.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Allen has a question, and then I think we're going to move on after that to the written statements. But Councillor Allen?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have a knowledge of this particular site, having been the insurance broker for Chelsea Timber up until 2008. Number 74, which is one half of the semi-detached, was actually a very derelict building even back then, and was actually only used as a store for fittings. And most of the car parking spaces which are in question there, you're not actually losing any, because the staff that worked for Chelsea Timber actually parked there during the day. So those are no longer parking there, so it's probably freed up some parking spaces. And I believe there's no loss of jobs either, because Chelsea Timber have moved to new premises. But the questions particularly I wanted to ask were in relation to the design review panel. and it would appear that they were not aware of the building at QVC redevelopment. And really, if they had been aware of the development at QVC, which has a pitched roof on it, would they have proceeded, or would you have allowed them to proceed with a flat roof on the 4th story for this building? So really, I think the design is of question on here. And there was another point. Also, you say there's a gap between the QVC development and this new development. How big is that gap, and what is it used for? Or is it just being used as a driveway in for parking? If you could answer those questions, please.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think actually your answers will probably best be shown with CGI of the building which we do have. Andy, do you want to come back and probably present that as well?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm asking Ian to. We found the CGI of the adjoining development, and you see it's 3 stories, brick built up to the back edge of pavement. In many respects, it has some similarities to the scheme before you tonight. That's it there, and it has a flat roof combination of shades of brick. So that's been approved, and from what my colleagues are informing me is that there were little or no objections to this development. I think the objections, frankly, Chair, come forward on this application have been mainly because of the additional 4th floor, and that seems to be the focus of most people's concern. Ian might be able to elaborate in terms of the gap. I just think the gap is to provide a certain degree of spacing so you don't have a terracing effect. And I note on the flank elevation, sorry, Chair, that image keeps disappearing. There is some detailing on the elevations you can see. I'm not sure whether that's brick detailing or it's allowing any high-level light into those flats where you see the projecting balconies on the front elevation closest to our site. I have a feeling there's some high-level windows in there, so clearly there needs to be some separation there to provide some sunlight in from across this application that's before you this evening. I hope that covers Councillor Aaron's points and perhaps goes back to Councillor Shields' concerns about lacking any image to show what the approved development in 2017 is for the site next door.
Okay, thank you. I've got one last quick question from Councillor Gallagher, and then we will move on to speakers and written statements. Councillor Gallagher, do you want to ask your question quickly?
Yeah, thanks. It was just about the roller shutter. I know from experience that roller shutters are very, very noisy things, and it's going to be right up near to the new development, although it is set back next to it. I just wonder if it was discussed at any time that, you know, these are noisy. Would it not have been better to have had gates that opened? Just, you know, was it ever considered?
There is a condition in respect to the roller shutters. So officers did receive objection to the provision of the roller shutters in terms of noise and disturbance. Now, obviously within the application that we've got, we haven't got any final details of those shutters. Hence the requirement to put the condition, which I believe off the top of my head is condition 32, which is the final details of the roller shutters to ensure that they don't result in sort of excessive noise and disturbance to the neighbouring occupiers. And as I say, I mean, this would be something that we would consult with our environmental health colleagues and also highways in terms of highway safety, just to ensure that those shutters wouldn't cause a nuisance and wouldn't result in any adverse impacts on the highway safety.
Can I also add to that, Chair, yeah, that if you have a look at the floor plan, if you had gates, they would either open up over the pedestrian highway and into the carriageway of Castor and Grove, or they would open up into the site. And I think, as you can see, that is going to have implications in terms of the efficiency of the car park layout. So the roller shutter option would obviously take up less amount of space And, you know, I'm sure these things can be designed in a manner which is not going to give rise to undue noise nuisance to neighbours. And as Ian said, there's a condition on the application to that effect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. With that, we're going to move on to the next part of this item, which is the written statements. Now, we take these as read, but are there any questions arising from those that we need to ask officers about? And if you do have any, can you just remind us which individual comment you're speaking about so we can find it? And let's give a few seconds for see if anyone has any. Okay, thank you. So we're now going to move on to speakers, and we have 4 sets of speakers for this item. An objector, someone speaking in support, a ward councillor, and then the applicant at the end. So what we'll do is move through each of these one at a time, get an officer's response, and then open up for questions. The first speaker we've got is Mrs. Terry James. Welcome to the committee. What you've got about 4 minutes. You've got 4 minutes to address the committee, and we'll start the timer when you start. So don't worry about rushing to begin. And then, if that's okay, we've got some questions possibly at the end from councillors. So, Mrs. James, you have to unmute first, because at the moment your sound's not on. So there should be an icon with a microphone.
Hello, I must apologise, Chair. I'm actually severely vision impaired. I'm doing all of this by sound and audio, and I couldn't find the mute button. I'm so sorry. How long have I got left?
Oh, no, so the 4 minutes starts when you start speaking, so don't worry. You got the full 4.
Right, so should we just go for it?
Yes.
So, first of all, I just want to say that because I can't follow any, because I'm severely sight impaired, I can't follow any notes. I'm doing this entirely off the top of my head and off by heart, and I've had very little time to prepare. But I just want to say I have lived in this area for over 25 years, so I know it really, really well. And I can tell you that this development, as it stands, is not appropriate for this area, and it will be detrimental for local residents, including the people living in the new development. So I understand, completely understand the need for housing, really important. And I think local residents would welcome a development which enhances the local area and is an improvement on what's there already. But you know, it's got to be right. And I have to say that although it's affordable housing, and that's great, just because the people living there are possibly on relatively low incomes, it doesn't mean to say they're not entitled to live in a really pleasant environment that's not over congested, and it's got enough parking and enough playing space for their children. So I'm just thinking about the development down on Carshalton Road. I think it's known as the Denny Carter housing now. I understand that has been a disaster for the area. So please, let's not make the same mistakes as we did there. Let's, you know, we've got an opportunity to build something really, really good that's going to improve the area. So my main problem is, although the developers have tweaked the application slightly, they haven't really taken on board a lot of the objections of local residents. They've looked at the parking, which is a huge problem, and they have reduced the playing area, which is a problem in itself. And so they've created 7 more parking spaces. So from 21, they've gone to 28. But there are 35 flats proposed. Now, that's not even 1 parking space per flat. And as we know, a lot of properties will have more than 1 car owner. There could be 2 or 3 car owners. That's not enough parking. We all know Carshalton Grove is densely populated, and it already has huge problems with parking. Huge problems, antisocial, irresponsible parking. And that is going to increase because there's not enough parking on this site. Can you imagine you have 2 small children in your car, you've loaded it up with shopping, you drive into the car park and there's nowhere to park. So you have to go and find somewhere in the surrounding streets and you end up parked miles away, streets away. This happens. I know. I have neighbours who don't go out in the evening because they're terrified of coming back and not being able to park near their property. You know, they've had to walk quite a long way late at night to get home. The bus stop is having to be moved. The bus stop on Westmead Road is going to be moved. It's going to be, TfL have identified that it's going to encroach on the zebra crossing there. That zebra crossing has been placed there because it's the safest place for it. So this development is at odds with Sutton local plan. I think particularly policy 28. And also the design review panel did find fault with it. There's huge safety issues. That junction with Westmead Road is so busy already. The increased traffic coming in and out, and with that junction, with the access to the development place where it is going to cause gridlock. It's going to be really disastrous for the area. But you can change that by not making the flats, if you can make fewer flats by taking off the 4th story and having fewer flats there and just tweaking the design a bit, you're going to improve it and make a really nice development for the area, that will enhance the area. So I hope that you guys will take that on board. Thank you. I think that's my 4 minutes. Have I got any more time?
Sorry, I've just been speaking to you for about a minute and I've realised my mute button was on. So sorry. I was going to say thank you very much. It was perfect on 4 minutes. So what we're going to do is some members, some councillors have questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
But before we do, I'm just going to pass back to officers to see if there's anything they want to clarify, or any points that you raised that they want to address before I do that.
Okay.
Chair, I just and thank you for Mrs. James for her comments on that. I just want to remind members, I'm not sure how many members will recall, it's the development I think that Mrs. James was referring to next to St Philomena's. It was actually refused by Planning Committee and allowed on appeal. And I would have to agree with Mrs. James. I think it's an awful development, but I certainly wouldn't want to tarnish this particular scheme with that particular brush. And that's the only comment I'd like to make, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Mrs. James, I've got a question from Councillor Shields. So Councillor Shields, do you want to ask your question?
I think I'm back on. Good evening, Miss James.
Hello.
Good evening. This is all rather new for us all. This using technology, and there's not a lot of sort of personal flow in these meetings sometimes. But what I think I took from what you said, and I did listen very carefully, is basically your consideration can be summarised as an overdevelopment with the lack of amenity space, shortage of car parking. So what you're really saying is you're not against development of the site per se, but the site is, the application as it stands is not sensitive to the requirements of the local area, and it's like, I think you used the word overdevelopment. Is that a fair character?
That is the word I didn't use, but I wish I had. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
It gets used a lot around these parts.
I'm not familiar with these planning terms. Yeah,
of course. Okay, but that is the thrust of what you said, and also the quality of the environment, for the proposed occupiers.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to live with this for a long time, so let's get it right. Absolutely, something that improves the area would be fantastic. And not overdevelopment of the site.
Okay. Message received. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. James. We've also got Councillor Clare.
Hello there, Mrs. James. Thank you for speaking to us today. Quick question. Sorry, I missed where you live, but it's near where this application is.
Yes, I live in Carshalton Grove.
Okay. So I'm a Sutton Central councillor, so just across the border, so I know the area a little bit. Just very quickly, if you were going to walk to a train station, which one would you kind of instinctually want to walk to, and how long would you expect that to take?
Right. That is the thing with this area. There is no nearby railway station. There are 3, within about 20 minutes walk. So we are reliant on buses here. But I would probably go to Sutton Station because there's more choice there than there is from Carshalton Beaches or Carshalton. So I would go. So for instance, if I was I would get more options if one of the trains was cancelled. So it'd be Sutton, but that's 20 minutes. It's not a nice walk either. It's a difficult, especially for someone like me who's vision impaired. It's a very unpleasant walk.
How would you describe the availability of the buses? Do they kind of make up for it?
No, because you can't get a bus to Sutton Station. Well, you can. You've got to go up onto the main Carshalton Road to get a bus to the post office. I think that's the nearest. The old post office in Grove Road. I think that's the nearest stop to the Sutton Station. Otherwise, the 154 at the bottom of the road at Westmead Road, that goes to the bottom of Sutton, so that's no good. And the S3, although it does go to Sutton Station, it goes, as you know, these S buses go all around the houses. It takes a long time. It would be quicker to walk.
Okay, that's all I really wanted to ask you. Thank you very much again.
Okay.
Thank you. I can't see at the moment any other questions from councillors. So I'm just going to say thank you very much for coming once again.
You're welcome.
It's been really good having you. And you're welcome to, we can either stay on until we move on to debate, in which case, and then you have to leave, or you're free to leave the meeting now as well if you'd like, and follow us on YouTube.
If I can find the mute button, I'll mute myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye now.
Bye. So we've got the next person to speak is a supporter, and so I've seen Councillor Gehringer had a question. We might have to miss that one, I'm afraid, Councillor Gehringer. So we're going to move on to the supporter. We've got Ben Slater, I think, who's on the call already. Ben, you there?
Yes. Yeah, I'm here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, you've got 4 minutes. You've actually got 4 minutes and 11 seconds because the last one went over a few seconds. But the time will start when you start talking, and I'll stop you. We're out of time.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to read a short statement. So I'm Ben Slater, Senior Land Manager and representative of PA Housing Association. We are a registered provider of social housing. We have more than 23,000 homes across the Midlands, London and the South East. We have a delivery programme of approximately 500 new homes a year at present, and aim to deliver about 2,500 new homes by 2024. Our current programme comprises wholly affordable homes, and as well as Sutton, we are operational in a number of other London boroughs, namely Merton, Kingston, Croydon, Lambeth, Southwark, Lewisham and Brent. We are keen to build a relationship in Sutton, and along with this site, we have recently acquired a site on Throwley Way in 2019, where we hope to have an application soon to be submitted for a residential scheme there. We started discussions with Terrace Developments in November last year, and since which time we have been closely involved in the process, liaising with your housing officers and alongside our partners, meeting with several of your officers and councillors in March of this year. We have reviewed the scheme in detail with Terrace, and we are very happy with the proposals in front of you now and think the design is excellent. As a registered provider, we have secured funding from the GLA that enables us to bring private units not covered within the Section 106 into the affordable tenure. You will appreciate that in order for sites to work as 100% affordable, we have minimum requirements in terms of unit numbers, and I can confirm that those requirements are met here in order to achieve a financially viable scheme. I'm delighted to also confirm that we exchanged contracts with our partner Castor on the 27th of March, and this contract and delivery of 100% affordable homes is conditional only upon your decision this evening. Whilst the timing of exchange was at the height of the uncertainty caused by the pandemic, we trust this is a sign of our commitment to delivering affordable homes in Sutton. We're all aware of the need for affordable homes, and as a registered provider, we strongly support this application. In the hopeful event that you approve, PA Housing will take ownership of the site in August, and we are currently in negotiations with the contractor to enable works to start on site as soon as possible later this year, delivering 35 affordable homes for Sutton and significant build cost investment to the local economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we move on to questions, we're going to, like before, ask officers if there's anything they'd like to clarify or add or respond to from your 4 minutes or 2 minutes and 29 seconds.
Chair, can I come in here, and I might invite Alison Letson Legal to comment as well. Chair, as you're aware, we've given briefings to all groups prior to this meeting, and all groups have had the same information. So if anyone has not been privy to that information, and for the public watching this stream this evening, I need to say the following. The application is before you. Have to consider it on the details within the officer's report and nothing else. The contractual arrangements that have been mentioned this evening should not come into members' deliberations this evening, because we cannot guarantee. I appreciate what's been said, that terms have been struck, but that is not within the application. So it's something which is clearly has been mentioned this evening, but it shouldn't form part of members' deliberations this evening. The application before you is based on 31% affordable housing based on units and 35% on habitable rooms per hectare. So I need to clarify that point, which I've made clear in the members' briefings we've had prior to tonight. I'll invite Alison Letson Legal to come in and say a few more words of clarification if she feels necessary. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. Alison Letts, Legal Officer. Obviously, this news is welcome news for the Council, but such future proposals are not part of the application in front of you this evening. You must consider the application in the papers, which obviously the evidence to which has been robustly examined by the planning officers in making their recommendation. And as Mr. Webber mentioned, that proposal does include 31% of affordable housing or 35% respect of habitable rooms. Thank you.
Thank you. And following that advice, can I ask any members here, when they've got questions, to limit yourself to questions about the report and not to any information that we've been told shouldn't form part of our deliberations tonight? Is that okay? So Councillor Shields, you've got a question.
Hi. Yes, the question is the affordable homes issue. Is that affordable homes being built for people on the Sutton housing list or people from any housing list anywhere?
Yeah, I believe it is. I need to just clarify it with planners, but I understand that it comes from, under the nominations agreement, we'd have to appoint or offer homes to Sutton residents in the first instance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to clarify as well that as part of the Section 106 agreement, the applicant has to enter into a nominations agreement with the council and obviously give first preference to the council for anyone on that housing list. So that would be correct.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'm going to give a few more seconds. Okay. No, I think that's it. So, Ben, thank you very much for coming to speak to us today. There's no further questions at the moment. And like I said before, you can either stay on till the end of presentations or until we move into debate, or you can leave the conversation out. It's up to you. Councillor Gehringer, you're making a sound. You've got a question.
Hello.
Hiya.
Right. The question the answer I wanted to give, the lady was talking about earlier on about getting a bus to the station. What she didn't mention was there is the 154 bus that goes past Carshalton Beaches. That was it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. I think she mentioned the 154 going the other way, but yeah, okay. But thank you for that. So Ben, there are no other questions. So thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Cheers. Thank you. Okay, the next person on our list is Councillor Short. Councillor Short, welcome to the Planning Committee. Have you been to Planning Committee before?
I've observed a few times, but no, beyond that.
Okay, it is the best committee, so make sure you run it next year. Okay, Councillor Short, you've got 4 minutes, 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which will start when you begin talking, and then afterwards, if you can stay on the line for any questions from councillors, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you all for the chance to be able to speak this evening. I also just wanted to start somewhat paradoxically by actually thanking the developer. Despite me objecting to this application, I've wanted to place on record that the work that has gone in prior to us getting to this point, the conversations we have had together, have been really encouraging. I want to start by underlining that, and to underline that my view on this isn't to reject this and have nothing go forward. I want to work with the developers going forward to make sure that we do have a use for this site that really uplifts the area. But my concern relating to the design of the building sort of forced my hand, as it were. I know that we have had productive discussions on this back and forth, but we aren't yet at a stage where I feel comfortable with this going ahead. And that centers around that fourth story. Again, movements have been made on that, but it's just, to me, too out of keeping with what is already in place and the development that has been approved next door, such that really having a 3-story building on that site would be more appropriate in my view. I also wanted to draw members' attention to the design review panel and just urge that whatever weight that you as members of this committee place upon that design review panel's recommendations, I would urge you to have, in this case, downweight the panel's decisions, as the expected process of having ward councillors present was not followed in this case. We were quite aggrieved that we were not requested to form part of that process. But if members do place any weight on the design review panel, please do that, bearing in mind that the normal expected process was not followed in this case. And again, I would very much welcome the chance to be able to continue working on this with the developer to get something built here. I'm very much pleased with the idea of more affordable housing in our borough. I've spoken about it at length. And I'm determined to work with the developer to get something on this site that delivers that. But I just don't feel that what is before you today is acceptable for that. Thank you.
You again. Thank you, Councillor. Again, before we move to questions, and Councillor Gehringer has got one, I'm going to ask officers if they have anything they want to respond to from your presentation.
Chair, we might need to come back on the point about the ward councillors not being invited to the design review panel. I'm getting clarification on that, Chair, so I might want to come back on that just to give members a bit more of an understanding as to what might have happened there. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Gehringer. In the meantime, do you want to ask your question?
Here we go. Yes. Thank you, Chairman. I always listen very carefully to what the ward councillors have to say, and I have to say I do agree with what he's saying. I don't like the idea of the fourth story. I don't like the idea of a flat roof. If we got rid of the fourth story, we get rid of the flat roof, that means less residents and less car parking. So, I mean, I would go along with him on his viewpoint on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clifton.
Thank you very much, Jake. That was very interesting, helpful. You did say, you're honest in saying you'd had some discussions with the developer and you felt that they had made some improvements to the design as a result of the discussion. I wondered what those were. I don't know whether we could actually just look at the picture again of the development. Because you have focused very much on this fourth story, which does seem to me to be sort of somewhat set back when it's when it's looked at. That was my question.
There we go.
So the areas of improvement that we were able to sort of hammer out relate to the detailing around the windows, as well as the brick colour, and on the ground floor, I think original designs were for retail space. There were some concerns regarding traffic movements. I think, that were raised with them, and through officers that has been removed. So those were welcome changes, very welcome. And again, I just want to underline that relationship, that working together on this is something that I want to see continue going forward, so that we can resolve this issue with that fourth story and get something built here that is acceptable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Before we move on to any other questions, we've got Andy Webb just wants to come back on that earlier point about the design review panel.
Yeah, Chair, very quickly, and just to clarify to members of Planning Committee that it is correct that the ward councillors were not invited. It wasn't intentional. I think it was just an oversight, and I do know that there have been conversations between officers and members, as Councillor Short has rightly identified. We have been able to work with the kind of community concerns, really, about trying to bring this forward in a form of design which we think is in keeping. I think we have listened to the points that councillors have made, and so have the developers and their architects. So it's something obviously we won't repeat again. My apologies to Councillor Short and his ward colleagues. It was simply an oversight on our part, for which we apologise.
Okay.
Could I just to say there's no ill will intended there. I know that it wasn't intentional, but yeah.
Cool. No, thank you. But I think it's useful to just get a clarification. I have a question. Obviously, one of the things we've got to do in this committee is balance the positives and negatives. And I was wondering why you think, on balance, that fourth floor isn't outweighed by the fact that we're going to have quite a high proportion of affordable housing. I mean, leaving aside the potential for the future, the 31% actually, compared to some applications we get, is very high, and obviously that housing is needed. And even if it was not affordable, perhaps the extra units that the fourth floor provides is quite useful in dealing with the housing needs of the local borough. But I was wondering if you can just come back on why you think the fourth floor outweighs that benefit.
I think so. The main point I would make is the fact that it is so out of character with what is already existing there. We already have degrees of affordable housing and new developments in the area that are maximum of 3 stories that do provide good quality housing. And I don't, in my view, see that adding this fourth story, admittedly with the changes that have been made since first designs were seen, I'm not sure that is necessary, really, to bring affordable housing to the area.
Okay, thank you. That's the only question I think that I had, which in response to that. Are there any other questions for Councillor Short? No. Okay. Well, thank you, Councillor Short, for coming before us tonight. And like I said, I hope you think about coming back to us again. We're going to move on now to the last person, the last group of people to speak, who are the applicants. And I believe, well, first of all, I believe I've lost my speakers list. But secondly, we've got the applicant with us. Can you hear us? Are you logged on?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, Matt McLean and Nick Lane. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, so well, first of all, welcome to the committee. Thank you for coming before us today. You've got 4 minutes and 11 seconds to address the committee, and once you start speaking, the timer will go. And then we've got and then I'll stop you after the 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Short, for his words and acknowledgement of our efforts. My name is Matt McLean, and I'm the Managing Director and Joint Owner of Terrace Development. Our focus is on sites within the M25, and our current projects include Mitcham. We're due to complete works this year for London Quadrant with 100% affordable housing, and Forest Hill, where we will again be delivering 100% affordable housing for our partner on this site, Paragon Housing Association. The site is a former timber yard in a state of disrepair, and our proposals are in line with Sutton and London-wide local plan priorities in creating new homes on brownfield sites. The site itself, Chelsea Timber, I mean, obviously there's currently two access points onto it at Westmead and Castor Grove, which historically have had large heavy goods vehicles going down. You know, that reason and the site's location within a residential area has meant it's very, very difficult for that business to work. So the site is now vacant, and part of that business has been bought by another party who moved elsewhere to an industrial estate. We started this process in 2018, November 2018, since which time we have had extensive dialogue with you officers and held 2 public consultations with all councillors in attendance and 2 presentations to the design review panel. Just to clarify, if I may, on the design review panel, the members were aware of the adjacent scheme that had approval, and I recall them thinking that, or referencing it being the use of brick columns, which was used to break the mass into bays, and the flat roof, and that sort of is what led us to where we went to with our scheme in the first instance. As I say, we have made a number of changes, and 5.39 of the committee report concludes that the changes made to the scale and massing are sufficient to address the concerns raised in the DRP and considered to result in a scheme which is of exceptional design. Just to clarify a couple of other points, the footpath at the front, we think we've got a footpath of 2.7 metres. There's then a further 1.8 metres defensible space before you get to the front doors. Roller shutters, that was led by Secured by Design. We would be more than happy to look at a condition where we incorporate folding gates instead, if that was preferable. But I fully understand the application in front of you is what you have to consider with 35% affordable housing. If I have room, you know, the reason it's 31 by unit is because we work with your housing officer to get family London affordable units at ground floor. You know, we've worked with the officers, and as I said, they've been aware of our discussions with Paragon. I said, look, I know you have to look at what's in front of you, but for me, it is about transparency. It's about being open with you. We have done that agreement, you know, to work with Paragon, and you know, subject to your decision, they will be completing that purchase on 3rd of August and delivering 100% affordable homes. You know, there is a contractor there. I said, I understand you've got the boats in front of you, but our intention is to provide homes and affordable homes. You know, the contractor's there. There's a £5.7 million build contract, bringing, you know, a massive sort of economic stimulus to the local area. You know, Sutton's affordable housing, as you're aware, you know, there's a need for over 1,000 homes a year. You know, I'm really proud of the proposals in front of you this evening. I'm passionate about the opportunity to contribute to that target. The car club itself provides 13 spaces, which is on top of the 28. We do care what we do. We think it will be a pleasant environment. This is my business. I live, breathe, and sweat this. I think it's a fantastic development, and with your hopeful approval, we can get on and deliver 35 affordable homes to the people that need them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, like we've done with the other speakers before, we moved to questions from councillors. I'm just going to bring in any officers that want to clarify or highlight anything from your 4 minutes. Okay. I don't think there is anyone. So we can move through to any questions from councillors. If you just let me know on the chat function if you have any. Okay, it doesn't look like there are any. I mean, one question I had, I'm going back to, so a number of people have raised the 4th floor as part of the application as in their view being not in keeping with the local area. I was wondering if you could tell me what the thinking behind that 4th floor is, if it's been modified at all from the original plans. And just clarification for me, I should probably know this, but how many places are there going to be on that 4th floor?
Sorry, Chair, I didn't appreciate that the question was of me. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. So it was about a number of people raising the 4th floor, and in their view, it being out of keeping. I was asking what the thoughts were behind having that 4th floor, and if the design of the 4th floor has changed throughout the process, and also how many units are going to be on that 4th floor.
Yeah. So the initial process, I think, sort of stemmed from, to be quite open, looking at the adjacent scheme that was consented and the style of that and the height of it with the flat roof, and then seeing the corner plot. We first met with the officers in December 2018 and acknowledged that corner plot presented that opportunity. That was a thought that was again further supported during the design review panel process, where they felt it was an opportunity to enhance that corner. In terms of the design of the rationale behind it, yeah, we've looked at a lot of schemes. We've looked at probably 20 different iterations of various schemes with 4 or 5 different styles of architecture. Do you do it with a pitch roof to accentuate the corner? Do you push it back? And I think after exhaustively looking at those, it was felt that setting it back as much as we have and keeping the brick at the top would help it sort of fit in better. In terms of the I think the setbacks as well, there's about a 8 metre setback on both flanks, bringing it in from the corner. So bring it in from the edge. So where you've got the 3-storey building next door, it's set back from that about 8 metres, and then you've obviously got the 3-storey pitch and Castor and Grove. I think in terms of the units at the top, there are 9 units in there. I think from memory, top of my head, I think there might be 5 1s, 4 2s. So that's on there. So again, for us, and part of this is, we try and get the balance between getting, the best scheme. Like I am passionate about it. We love what we do, but it's getting the best scheme and it's getting the best provision for Sutton and for people in need. And part of that is the conversation around affordable housing. And I really am choosing my words carefully, Chair, but the reality is that if you remove those units at the top, the viability of that scheme comes into question, and you wouldn't be able to bring forward the 31 or 35% that we're doing anyway. So I'm not saying that we've put units on to justify affordable. We've put units on because we feel it's the right scheme. But the benefit of doing that right scheme is that we can provide, ignore the paragon, ignore 100%, although that's what we're doing. It's 35 by have room. It's 5 family units. It's 7 London affordable rent family homes. They're dual aspect. They've got their own front door. They've got their gardens. These are great units for people who need them. Thank you.
No, thank you. Do we have any other councillors who have any questions about the scheme? Okay. Well, thank you. We're going to move on to debate now. So can I thank everyone who's come, the objectors, supporters, ward councillors and the applicant. Thank you for their contributions, but can I ask them at this point to log off so that the debate can happen just with members of the committee? And I think that is everyone. Great, thank you. So can I, we open the debate, and if there's anyone who wishes to start, can they let me know in the chat function? Councillor Clare.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I don't live too far away from this proposed development. I think this is quite an attractive building. I think in many ways it looks like a nicer place to live than where I live. The parking provision is quite good, and in its defence, I think a lot of the area around it already has quite a kind of retail and commercial feel to it, even though it is in a bit of a residential estate. But at the same time, I'm aware of the transport limitations on this, and I know that the mitigation for that has been to put in a lot of parking spaces. But again, the implication of that is that we're going to have a lot more cars driving around in this area. And I think when we have our local plan, which has its clearly designated areas for intensification and development, I think the implications for that could be quite concerning. So I'm inclined to vote against this proposal at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Foster?
I take a rather different view to Councillor Clare, insofar as I do take the point about the viability of the project and the need for affordable housing. The design with the fourth story, listen to what Councillor Gehringer said earlier about concern about a flat roof and 4 stories. Well, if he did a pitched roof on 3, he's going to be at the same sort of height. So I think the design is excellent. I think it's necessary. That site has been, I knew a business in Barron Avenue 30 years ago, and they were talking about redeveloping this particular site. It's been a long time coming. It's a brownfield site. We need affordable housing. This is a very, very well thought out design, and I would support it wholeheartedly.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clifton?
Hi, yes, I think I'd agree with that. Can I say, I've often walked past this site, and the last time I walked past it, I noticed that there is a sign saying that the timber yard has now moved to an industrial estate in Beddington. And yeah, that's a much more appropriate place to have a timber yard. So once it's gone, obviously you've got this large site, and it's inevitable you're going to have some major residential developments. It's right to have some major residential development there. We need the accommodation. Not much of what's been said has been about design. I mean, I find I always look at these things and say, no, you know, I could envisage something nicer than that. But at the same time, I don't find this design sort of, you know, wholly unacceptable or something intrinsically wrong with it. The fourth story, I mean, just looking at it, it's sort of slightly set back. It doesn't seem to me this fourth story makes a sort of great deal of difference to the design. You've got 35 flats with 29 car parking spaces, which isn't ideal, but and all sorts of grounds, but is not unusual. And you have got some positives with it: children's play area, affordable housing. And when we did finally see the picture of the development next door, it doesn't seem to me to be particularly out of keeping with the development next door. And obviously, if the people, if this is granted, and the people who own the site next door come back with some new proposal, then that has to be considered at the time. So overall, I mean, with some reservations, I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clifton. Do we have anyone else who wishes to add to the debate? Obviously, we've got views on both sides. I mean, I think it'd be good to get a better sense of the whole committee's views on this development before we move towards a vote. I mean, I personally am very much in line with Councillor Foster's views on this. So when it comes to the vote, I'll be voting for it. But Councillor Haldane, do you want to come in?
Thank you. I actually really like the design. I can't see much wrong with it personally. I did listen to what Councillor Short said and took it into consideration, but I think the developer makes a very compelling case. It's much needed affordable housing in the area, and I actually like how it looks. I guess that's a matter of personal taste, but there we go. So I'll be voting in favour.
Okay. Thank you. And what I'll do, I'll give just another 9-10 seconds for anyone else who wishes to come in to bring anything. I know, Councillor Shields, if you want to come in, I know you spoke at the beginning of the item, you had some questions, and I don't know if you want to come in and talk about if your concerns have been met, or whether you still have the same concerns as before I bring in Councillor Allen. No? Okay, Councillor Allen, do you want to come in?
Yes, I think this is a long overdue development of what is a brownfield site. The parking, 35 places, I think is excellent. And also the fact that I was a bit concerned about the 4th floor, but the fact that it's set back is not that obtrusive. So yeah, I'd be happy to support this application.
Great, thank you, Councillor Allen. What I think we'll do, I think we've, unless anyone else wishes to speak, I think we've got a fair view of what the committee might move to. So I think we should stick with the recommendation as it currently is, which is to approve, and then we'll see where we are at the end of the votes, to see if we need to have any alternative. So Sharon, are you okay to go through the members?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So if I could just once again ask you to turn on your camera and microphone and state if you are voting for, against or abstaining on the recommendation. I will move to each member in turn. So if I could start please with Councillor Allen.
I'm voting for the application.
For, thank you. And Councillor Richard Clare.
I'll vote against the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Clifton.
I vote for.
Thank you. Councillor Tim Foster.
I vote for the application.
Thank you. Councillor Vincent Gallagher.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Gehringer.
I'll be voting against. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Amy Haldane.
I'll be voting for.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Shields.
I think Councillor Shields is having a slight issue with his microphone at the moment, but he's put against in the chat. Is that okay to take that up?
Let me just,
is that okay to take that as a vote?
Just check the chat. Yeah, I can see that he's put against the application in the chat, so I'll take that as his vote. And then Councillor Drew Heffernan.
I'm for.
Oh, we're alive.
Good. Hey.
Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Shields. I took your vote out of the chat, and I believe that you voted against. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm sorry. I just don't know why and how it wouldn't work.
No worries. So I've marked you as against. So overall, councillors, that means there are 5 votes for, 3 votes against, and 1 person abstained. So I'll now pass back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's 5 for, 3 against, and 1 abstained. So that means that the application is carried. Thank you very much for everyone on that one. I'm going to suggest that before the last application, we have a quick 5-minute break just to go to the bathroom and have a glass of water or whatever you want. Is that okay? And then we'll come back for, let's say, I'll start again in 5 minutes. It'll be 21:48 by my clock. Is that okay?
just got a couple of minutes for the stream to catch up, so as soon as it's live, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you.
So when is the allotment? When is the allotment item coming up then?
You're live now, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gang, we can pick up at the end that question, but I don't think we have a fixed date for you at the moment. So we don't have a date for you at the moment, so I can find out and we can get back to you. Okay, so welcome back everyone. Thank you for those of you who've stayed this late onto YouTube. We're now moving on to our final item of the evening, which is item 8, which will be the garage block at the rear of 52 to 62B St Albans Road in Cheam. So can I pass through to the officer who's going to present this item?
Hello, Chair, can you hear me? And
yeah, we can.
Lovely. Good evening, Chair and councillors. The next application up for consideration is the garage block rear of 52 to 60B St Albans Road. The application before us for consideration is for the demolition of 25 of the existing garages on site, retaining one single garage in the northern corner, and the erection of 5 two-storey, 2-bed, 3-person terrace dwellings with associated parking, cycle and refuge storage, and hard and soft landscaping. This slide here shows the outline of the site with St Albans Road to the south of the site, Saltash Close to the east, and Westfield Road to the north. These photos here show views to the west along St Albans Road, the views to the east along St Albans Road, the access point here to the site, which is between 2 properties to the south on St Albans Road, and further views of the access. These are views from within the site showing the access point, the garages that are to be demolished. This is a view here towards St Albans Road and the view here towards Saltash Close. These are other photos of the site and a plan showing the current layout of the garages. This is a slide here showing the proposed layout of the terrace of 5 properties, with the rear of the properties and gardens facing the properties on St Albans Road to the south, the front of the properties facing the properties to the north in Westfield Road. Here we have the proposed elevations with the side elevations here, the front elevations of the property and the rear elevations. As you can see, the side elevations do not have any first floor windows in the flanks, and at the rear you can see that there is a apex roof that slopes down to just above first floor level at the rear of the property, facing the closest properties on St Albans Road. This image here shows a close-up of the front elevations, the flank elevations, and this is an image here showing greater detail of the proposed materials and an image of the front elevations of the terrace. Here you can see the external finishes and the absence of windows again in the flank. Due to the backland location, it can have a more contemporary appearance due to its backland location and more flexibility in the design. This drawing here gives more detail of the entrance, showing the width is acceptable for the access for the vehicles, along with the temporary storage area for refuge for collection day. The loss of the garages on this site is deemed to be acceptable, as a survey shows that the garages are not currently used for car storage and therefore would not result in any overspill to the surrounding roads. The change to residential use is acceptable on this brownfield site in a residential location. The design is deemed to also be acceptable, with the asymmetric roof design helping to overcome the impact on the neighbours. The biodiversity of the site is considered to be protected, and the immediate surrounding area will have additional planting with additional soft landscaping, and it's considered that there would be a net gain in biodiversity compared with the low value of the biodiversity interests on the site at present. Thank you, Chair. That concludes my presentation. The case before you is recommended for approval, subject to conditions.
Thank you, Polly. Do we have any councillors who have any technical questions on this item? Councillor Clifton, do you want to come in?
I just going to ask, so we lose, so we gain 5 houses and we lose these garages. I just wondered who these garages belong to, and what is the loss? From what you were saying, people actually don't, this is not unusual, people don't park cars in garages. Often these old garages aren't big enough anyhow, but they use them for storage. But there is a loss. I just wondered who, what objection there is to the loss of the garages. It's really, I suppose, what I wanted to say.
Yeah, people's main concern with the loss of the garages is that it would result in an overspill in parking pressure on the surrounding roads. However, the applicant has carried out a survey, and the results of that have shown that the garages, due to their size and condition, are generally not used for storing vehicles. So the loss of those garages wouldn't actually result in that perceived pressure on street parking in the surrounding area.
Chair, if I may come in and just add to that, there is of the garages, there is one of the existing garages which is used to store a private motor vehicle, and that is being re-provided within the developments. Many members on this committee will remember the housing revenue account schemes which council commissioned developments of garage sites. Exactly the same assessment has been undertaken for the loss of the garages on this site as we did for the council commissioned properties. And as Polly said, because it's used for general storage purposes, we're quite confident there's not going to be an overspill arising on 2 joint streets. And the one garage space which is used for parking of a vehicle is going to be re-provided, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Gallagher, do you want to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. One is there any sort of view of the other side of the buildings? This is the, I presume, the front side at the front door. I like the building. It is quite a pleasant looking area. My main concern is probably down to access. I know it's probably wide enough to drive a car down. It's certainly not wide enough to get cars down facing each other. So I'm mindful of how you think that could work, Polly. But also the width of it, obviously the dirt trucks, how are they going to get down without damaging the walls of the houses either side? And they're not somebody's fence, they're the actual walls of the house. And therefore, you know, it really means that people have to be able to get down without scraping them. You've got delivery, these people moving in will have, you know, removals vans. How would that handle? And also, when I was down there, there was just happened to be a number of cars parked very, very near the opening and across the road. And I was just sort of standing, looking and wondering how easy it would be to actually just get in and out if all the cars that were parked there the time I was there were there a lot of the other time. Thank you.
Thank you. Polly, you okay to answer that one?
Yep. I mean, the actual width of the driveway is currently used by vehicles to enter and exit the site. We feel that it is actually wide enough to still allow for vehicles to come in and out. Certainly larger vehicles wouldn't be expected to be able to utilise that short access road. But we are also going to be conditioning a traffic priority measure system, details of which will be submitted prior to commencement on site, which will give priority to cars coming in and out of the site, and if there's any pedestrians also wishing to exit the site, to ensure their safety as well.
Thank you, Polly.
Thank you. Polly, can I ask a quick question about the access as well? So that road, that alley is going to be used for the refuse as well. How's the refuse organised so that it doesn't not get used properly and then block all the access and cause a nuisance?
The intention is that every property has a bin store which is located at the front of their house, which is for the main storage of the bins. And just because obviously a refuse collection truck can't enter the site, there is a temporary place for those bins to be stored alongside the access road just for collection day. That prevents there being clutter on the pavement of St Albans Road. And allows for easy access for those collecting the refuse. So that isn't intended to be a permanent refuse storage place.
Okay, great, thank you.
I can pass you over to my colleague Nick Greenwood, who can provide some further comments on the traffic control system.
Thank you.
Yes, hello, thanks very much for the opportunity to comment. Yeah, the applicant has come up with a traffic signal scheme. The way that would work is that it would give priority to vehicles entering the site. That would be a green setting. That would be the default setting. If a vehicle wants to exit the site, then a loop system within inside the site would trigger a traffic signal to give a green setting for somebody wanting to exit, and obviously the entering traffic would be held while that takes place. So all traffic movements are covered. If a pedestrian or a cyclist wants to use the access way, there is a button to press at either end for those users. They would get priority over all motorised vehicles. So we're happy that is all safe. Regarding the waste management, there would be a management system in operation, which we would see the details of, so that there would be an absolute minimum time that the bins and other facilities are stored at the end of the driveway. So there would be an allocated person through the management system to bring those bins from each home into the allocated area and then bring them back to the individual homes as quickly as possible after that, so there's minimum disruption in the access way. I think the final issue that was raised was sort of visibility into the access road for vehicles exiting the site, and we would have required usual sight lines and other considerations to be taken into account there. We're happy with the arrangements.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that answers the questions.
Thanks, Nick. Jill, do you want to come in with a question?
Yes, I was going to ask the question you asked, but adding on to that one, we're proposing to have traffic signals. How reliable will those traffic signals be? Because traffic signals have a habit of breaking down. Do we have a fail-safe in case there's something not happening as it should do? I'm still concerned about the collection of bins, because there are other examples in the borough where bin lorries have had to go backwards up narrow lanes if something should go wrong with the traffic lights, and as Councillor Gallagher says, parked cars are in the way. But finally, what about emergency access? How will the fire brigade, if there was a fire, for example, or an ambulance needing to pick somebody up, how would they access the facilities?
Thank you, Councillor.
I can comment on that regarding the traffic system. If permission is granted, it will be conditions such that we would want to see before approving all the details of the traffic signal system, including the maintenance arrangements for that, to ensure that it is maintained and properly in place for a long time. So that is all covered, and we would have to approve all of that. Regarding emergency access, a large fire engine would not be able to get down the access, so there is a sprinkler system and hydrants that would be used. That's a common type of facility that's used where access to properties is difficult. So we're happy with what is being put forward for this development.
Okay, thank you. We've got two more questions now, then we'll move on to the other parts of the item. Councillor Gehringer, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thanks. I have to say the properties themselves look very nice. That's very nice design, I have to say. But my problem again was over the access. Are we? One or two questions have already been answered. Are we going to have double yellow lines on the entrance into the site? Because otherwise, if cars are parked either side, you know, you're not going to be able to get big vehicles in there. So, is it planned to have double yellow lines on the corners there?
There wasn't any immediate plans to do that, but in particular, as far as construction of the site is concerned, that will be subject to a construction logistics plan, so that all the details of how the site will be accessed during the construction period need to be written up, submitted to the authority, and agreed. So we will look at all of that, including the types of vehicles that will access the site for construction purposes. And obviously very large vehicles are not going to be able to do that, but we will satisfy ourselves that adequate things are put in place.
So you're saying that we will definitely have double yellow line. I think it's really essential for people going in and going out, that's where the access way comes out into the road, you've got double yellow lines on both corners. Please.
We would not necessarily put double yellow lines there.
Why not?
It's not considered necessary in this type of situation.
Well, I think it might be, quite frankly.
It's something that we would certainly look at as part of the construction logistics plan and the final access arrangements, but we will ensure that it's adequate.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gehringer. Councillor Shields, do you want to come in?
Yes. Can we talk through the waste system? Because I'll tell you what I think I heard is, with regimental precision, the bins will all be put out in a certain place, and with the same regimental precision, they will be collected, put tidily back where they were, and then taken back down to the houses. Is that what I heard?
That's correct. Yes, it will be part of the conditions of the development. There will be a management system put in place and an allocated person to do that. Yes.
So the person has yet. The person. Please excuse my scepticism, but we are relying then on the London Borough of Sutton collecting the waste at a prescribed time, every time. And does that include all of the recycling, the residents that subscribe to the garden waste system? This seems like a heck of a lot of bins and a heck of a lot of coordination. And I don't actually have the confidence that what's being described is achievable.
In the draft agreement, the management company say that they will provide an allocated person who would do that job regularly on the weekly waste and recycling collection days. So that would be a condition of the development. Yes.
Okay, let's expand that a bit more through you, Chair. So a person we'll call him Fred, if you like, for the purposes of debate. Fred is going to turn up every week at 8 o'clock in the morning, wheel the bins out, the correct bins at the correct time, put them in the correct place. And Fred is going to do what? Stand like a sentry outside Buckingham Palace, waiting for the bin lorry, which could have a window of appearing in 4 to 5 hours, perhaps. And then Fred will wheel those empty bins back and line them up all smartly, probably salute them, and do the same every week, rain or shine. Is that what you're telling me?
That yes, that is part of the management agreement. Yes.
Well, dear old Fred has got a bit of a job on his hand. Where will Fred come from? What's the carbon footprint of somebody coming in a car to trundle bins in and out 52 weeks of the year? How practical is this? And an agreement is only likely to be kept if it is actually practical. And I fail to see the practicality.
It's something that, as I say, they would have to submit the details of, and we would have to be happy of before that condition was signed off for the development.
Looking at the photograph that's up, so the house number 62B, they are going to enjoy what looks like, I don't know, 20 to 30 bins lined up on next to their property every week by dear old Fred. Is that the case?
Yeah, the bins would be stored on the entrance as you're looking into the drive from St Albans on the right the right hand side. Yes.
So when the London Borough of Sutton's bin collectors strew, unfortunately, they're very lovely people, but they're not known for their articulate skills in putting things back in uniform lines. So is Fred going to be on duty to, oversee the emptying of the bins?
Councillor Shields, sure. With all due respect, I think we've covered quite a lot of this management plan already. I think you may have a view one way whether it is legitimate and would work or not, and I think you can obviously factor that in to your vote later. But we do have only a short time left of the meeting, and you might want to raise this with the developer anyway, perhaps. I
don't want to raise it with the developer, no, because I think the flaw is inherent. We're looking at it here and now. If the developer had a private waste collection system from any one of the other people that's private waste, that could be that I believe could be managed, but this is pie in the sky.
No, thank you. And I think that's a kind more for debate later. But do hold on to that, and we'll probably come back to it. Can we move on now to any of the the written statements? And is there anyone who's got a question arising from those? And again, if you can mention which one it is that you're talking about when you do raise it. I'll give a few seconds for that. Councillor Shields, you said yes for the written statements.
Yes, please. I'm looking at the written statement from the applicant, who is on, let's have agenda item 9, page 143 of the supplementary agenda pack to councillors. Basically, the applicant alludes to the fact that there's already a planning application for one house, which was obviously sought through a fair amount of effort to get hold of. And the justification for one house is that now 5 crop up, with all the resultant over-intensification of use of the site. It finishes off with, don't worry, we'll appeal to be, if we can get this through at the planning appeal stage. And I say this, let them. Let's see them at appeal. Because a letter
forgive me, which page? Can you just repeat the page that it's on? I've got
page 143.
I've got that as Blenheim Road.
Sorry. In that case, I'll withdraw everything I've just said.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so we're going to move on now to speakers. We don't have any objectors, supporters, or ward councillors here, but we do have Mark Pender who's the applicant, and he's joined by Duncan Roberts and Thomas Dine. Is Mark, are you going to be the one that's presenting for the 4 minutes?
I am, thank you, Chair.
Okay, we'll give you, like I said, we've got 4 minutes, and when the time will start when you start talking, and I'll interrupt you when you get to your 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, Committee. As you heard, my name's Mark Pender and I'm the applicant's planning consultant. We first engaged your officers in April last year via your pre-app process. At that time, we proposed 6 houses, although based on your officers' initial advice, we reduced this to 5. The formal advice was issued in August last year and is summarised in paragraph 1.6 of the Commission report. We consider we have positively responded to the advice, which overall was actually quite positive. This has included reducing the height and volume of the houses and eliminating single aspect rooms in order to improve ventilation and indeed outlook. As you've read in the committee report, the principle of the proposal is considered acceptable. This view is based on the fact the existing garages, other than one which will be retained, are used for general storage rather than to park cars. In fact, only 6 are used by Sutton residents. As such, there will be no displacement car parking resulting from the proposal. The proposal will deliver 5 2-bedroom, 4-person family homes, contributing towards the delivery of housing in the borough. With regard to design, you've obviously seen the CGI, and I'm just going to quote from section B of the Commission report. It is considered that this development would improve the overall appearance of the area through good design, tree planting and soft landscaping, as the garages are in need of repair and renovation, and there is little landscaping value on site currently. The terrace of properties will be lower than existing properties in St Albans Road and Westfield Road, resulting in development that respects the scale and massing of the surrounding area, and will, due to its lower height, appear as subordinate, non-dominating development. This has been achieved by lowering the ridge and eaves height of the proposed dwelling so the development sits discreetly in its setting. The properties will have a more contemporary appearance than the surrounding properties, but the external materials will mean that the properties will blend in with the surroundings and would not provide a harsh contrast with neighbouring development. The proposal ensures both the existing residents and new residents enjoy exceptionally good amenity in terms of privacy, overlooking outlook and daylight and sunlight. The nearest property at first floor level is about 16 metres away at 62B St Albans Road and about 17 metres to 1 to 4 Saltash Close. However, as you've heard, there are no proposed habitable room windows facing any of the dwellings. In fact, the nearest habitable room existing at first floor level facing a proposed habitable room is about 47 metres away in Westfield Road. The proposed houses are all dual aspect, with units 1 and 5 being triple aspect. They all comply with the national space standards and exceed your garden space standards by at least 11 square metres per house. The development is sustainable, with not only the reuse of a valuable brownfield site, but also a policy compliant 35% reduction in CO2 emissions. In summary, I would reiterate what is said in the Commission report on page 116. I'm not going to repeat those, but just to pick up on a few points made by some of the councillors. As you've heard, fire engines will not access the site. There will be dry risers within the site, and this is a commonly used procedure. With regard to refuse, and if I could use the name, Fred will be employed by a management company. He will be paid by that management company from a service charge on the 5 houses. His job will be to ensure that the bins are out in timely fashion when they are collected by the council's refuse collectors. When that happens, he will then put the bins back in the houses so they don't hang around for too long. That's his job. If he doesn't do his job, somebody else will have to do his job at the management company. And if that doesn't work, a new management company will be employed. So I'd like to give the councillor the assurances that the refuse will be taken seriously, and to that end there will be a management company instructed. I won't say anything more, but I'm sure you've got some questions, which, along with myself, I'll be joined by the architect and the transport consultant.
Thank you very much, Matt. That is 4 minutes. Only questions from councillors? Councillor Shields is asking, what is Fred's carbon footprint? I imagine that is.
I'll withdraw that.
Okay. Fine. Councillor Foster.
It's quite obvious that the major downfall of this development is access. You can make management plans, appoint management agents and all the rest of it. Can I ask Mr. Pender, did you consider other access points? For example, if you come through Saltash, there's some double garages on the left-hand side of the houses there. Could you have accessed this in a different way by and given a better access than you've gone for?
I'll ask the architect to perhaps answer that as well, but I've obviously been presented with a scheme, a site, a red line, and that red line does not include access to Saltash Close. So the answer is no, but I'm not entirely sure or convinced that it would actually be practical. I don't know if Thomas has got anything to add to that. It would appear Tom's still muted, but I was just going to add to that. I mean, if you look at the existing site as it is at the moment, it's used principally for storage, but as you've heard, there are 26 garages there. So I guess in theory, if those 26 garages were actually used to park cars, or there were a few more comings and goings, the likelihood is that there'd be significantly more traffic generated by what's there at the moment compared to the 5 dwellings. But I'll sort of mute myself now and see if Tom's got anything further to add about Saltash Close.
Yes, if I may, we did explore that option. It obviously looked like a good place to access it. We simply don't have the right of access across that land. I believe it's privately owned by Sutton Council, and it's also approximately a metre lower down than the application site, so there'll be a real problem with the level difference.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Foster, did you have a follow up to that one or not?
No, it's where there is a similar sort of access point close to where I live, where there are two exits possible. One was left as a space this narrow and the other a much wider one. When anybody ever uses the narrow access point, the point that was being made by Councillor Gallagher about all of a sudden a car appears, they come out and even at 10 miles an hour or 15 miles an hour, if you're a pedestrian or a child on a bicycle coming out from between two houses, it comes as quite a shock. And it does in this exit point into the bridle path in Beddington. So I do have a major concern. I accept that there were garages before. When those garages were built, cars were a lot narrower, a lot slower, and perhaps less plentiful. I just think that it needs a better access point than is there. And I think, yes, you can make a plan. It sounds dreadfully practical, but I'm afraid I'm with Councillor Shields. I don't know that it works. That's all.
No, thank you, Councillor. Do we have any other questions for the applicant from members? So I'll give it a few more seconds. No? Okay. Can I say thank you for the applicants for coming this evening, and sorry for keeping you waiting for so long. We're going to move to the debate now, so if it's okay for you to leave the meeting at this point, and you can follow the rest of it on YouTube if you wish. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So we're now going to move into debate, and I think we've covered some of the issues, but if there's anyone who wishes to either add anything or summarise their views before we move to the vote. Councillor Clifton.
Well, I'm just going to say, yeah, we're losing some garages which are not been used as garages, just been used for storage. And so it's a fairly sort of scruffy site. I quite like the design of these houses, and yeah, we always need accommodation. On the issues that have been raised about it, I mean, the arrangements with bins is not, not unknown, not unusual with some other blocks of flats that I know of. The access issue, I mean, as I understand it, they're proposing some sort of form of traffic light system, but with 5 properties, there isn't sort of vast numbers of sort of comings and goings of cars every minute of the day. So I'd have thought something that people could negotiate fairly easily in terms of getting in and out. So I'm quite attracted by it. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I ask any members that aren't muted at the moment, can they mute, because we're getting a little bit of feedback up on the line. Councillor Whitehead, which is coming in, and then once Councillor Whitehead's finished, Councillor Galligan coming after that.
Yes, I would largely agree with Councillor Clifton. I think the houses look very nice, they're very attractive. And I think that because there's only 5 houses, as he says, that it shouldn't be insurmountable being able to manage the access on a daily basis. I don't think the waste is ideal, but it's the best we can do in the circumstances. And as Councillor Clifton has said, it is operated in that way in other parts of the borough. So I think I'm minded to agree with this.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Gallagher, the floor's open to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think the traffic light system could work. There are areas where we see dirt trucks, being parked up where they have to go into a muse-like situation to collect waste, and you get, John Lewis delivery trucks having to trundle along on some means to get them down the road. So I like the look of it. I agree with Peter. I think it's a nice looking, and I think people will enjoy living there. So I kind of think that it's like many places. It's not like a lot of us live in, but I think it's probably manageable.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gallagher. Councillor Galligan. Councillor Gehringer, do you want to make your comment? And I think we'll then move to the vote. Councillor Gehringer?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I agree with Jill, actually. Only 5 houses. They're very attractive. Yeah, there is a problem with access. Hopefully one can get over that, but I wouldn't want that to prevent me from voting for it.
Right, thank you, Councillor. As I can see no one else asking to debate, I'm going to ask Sharon, can we move through to the vote now, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So again, if I can just ask you to turn your microphone and camera on, and please state if you are voting for, against, or abstaining on the office's recommendation. So if I can ask first, please, Councillor Eric Allen. Councillor Allen. I'll come back to Councillor Allen because I can't hear him at the moment. Councillor Richard Clare.
In favour, for.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Clifton.
I'm in favour, for.
Thank you. Councillor Tim Foster.
I'm against it.
Thank you. Councillor Vincent Galligan.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Gehringer.
I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Amy Haldane.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Shields.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Jill Whitehead.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Drew Heffernan.
For.
Thank you. I'm just going to come back to Councillor Eric Allen. Councillor Allen, are you able to cast your vote, please?
Yes, I'm against. Against.
Thank you very much. So I make that 7 votes for, 3 votes against, and nobody abstained. So I'll now pass back to the chair.
Thank you, Sharon. So I've got 7 for, 3 against, and no abstentions. So that means that the officer's recommendation is carried. And that concludes our business for today. Item 10 was any urgent business, but I haven't been informed of any, and I don't have any myself. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's put work in to date for the presentations, and to all the community services staff, and to all the councillors and residents and applicants that have come before us this evening. I'm going to let you log off now. So thank you very much, and I shall see you in a few weeks' time.
Thank you, Chair.